Good evening, I'm Amna Nabaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, the joy from freed Israeli hostages is tempered by the long physical and mental recovery that lies ahead, and the memories of those who did not survive.
Major news outlets refuse to sign new restrictive Pentagon rules ordered by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
And how the wealthy are driving the current U.S. economy, often at the expense of working people.
They're spending on birthday parties and lavish weddings and growing their spending month after month. And the rest of America, the bottom 80%, they're cautious right now.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
Moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
The Charles F. Kettering Foundation, working to advance inclusive democracies. Learn more at kettering.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The fragile Israel-Hamas ceasefire faces new tension tonight, in part over the missing remains of more than 20 Israeli hostages.
All 20 living hostages were released yesterday, but they were supposed to be accompanied by the bodies of 28 deceased hostages. Only 8 have been handed over as of this evening. As Layla Molana Allen reports, again tonight from Israel, caring for the living is now a priority, while awaiting the delivery of the dead is excruciating.
A tidal wave of emotion on the day a nation had longed for. And then came the day after. For many months, the focus was on getting the hostages home. Now it's switched to helping them heal. The staff at Rabin Medical Center in Petah Tikva were ready, preparing for weeks, or some might say for 2 long years. 5 of yesterday's 20 released hostages landed here, and head nurse Michal Steinman was there to greet them.
And I'm supposed, to be very official. I'm the head nurse and welcome to the hospital. Doesn't work. I'm standing there and I'm feeling the river of emotions flow through them. Really, sometimes I'm feeling even all the nation sits at my shoulders and I have to hug them in order of all the people who want to do it.
Many more hugs as they were reunited with family. Having treated 9 previously released hostages and now experienced in what Steinman calls captivity medicine, a skill she hopes she'll never need to use again. They know the medical impact of years without access to regular food and sunlight, as well as possible physical injury from Israel's aerial bombardment of Gaza. Their physical condition was better than feared, but psychological wounds can take longer to unveil.
Only 24 hours ago they were in a tunnel, and now they are here in sort of a paradise, which everyone gives them whatever they want and just around them and love and hugs. But I think that for the long term, we're expecting a lot of issues, post-traumatic issues, depression issues, and other issues. And slowly, you work with them. A part of them will always stay in Gaza. You can't take those 2 years of their life. It's to learn how to live the best way with those parts that they left there.
Things as simple as giving recovering captives a choice over when they take their medicines and what they want to eat can help recover their sense of identity. But far more challenging, I ask her, how can they ever begin to feel safe again?
Safe and trust goes together. And when they cry, we hug them. And when they say, sometimes if they scream about us, it's okay, we can bear this. They understand that we're going to be there no matter what.
Here and across Israel, it was a day of unbridled joy, but not for everyone.
Every hostage, both living and deceased, was supposed to be returned home yesterday. But by the end of the day, just 4 of the 28 bodies had been sent home. Hamas said they don't actually know where all the bodies are. Israel said that's not good enough and has now threatened sanctions, including keeping the Rafah border closed and limiting humanitarian aid into Gaza until everybody is returned.
When the small kibbutz of Nir Oz, just 4 miles from Gaza's border, was attacked by Hamas militants on October 7th, 38-year-old Tamir Adar told his wife and young children to hide and went out to protect his home. Narrowly managing to escape as dozens of his neighbors were killed and kidnapped, Tamir's younger brother Nir feared the worst.
My mom was hoping and praying that he's alive, and she tried to convince herself that even if he were badly wounded, that he might survive. And then I went on the kibbutz to the spot where they were, and I saw lots and lots of blood. I did my 1+1 and I understood what happened.
They never saw him again. 3 months later, the family got the news they dreaded. Tamir was dead. Killed while fighting back, Hamas took Tamir's body to Gaza as a bargaining chip. Tamir's elderly Labrador, Luli, now clings to Nir, unable to understand why her dad never came back. Being unable to bring Tamir home and bury him has made his loss all the more unbearable. The Adars feel they've been living a life in limbo.
In the Jewish culture, it's extremely important for us to bury our deads. We cherish life, but we also cherish the way someone is ending his life. And it's super important for the family to have a place they can come and pray and meet the one that they miss. He loved his friend, his family. We used to play poker and watch football. He was really a funny guy, an honest guy, and a loyal guy. He never hurt anyone. On that morning of October 7th, he decided to put his own needs behind and help the community. And he was actually truly hero. There were 4 people who stood against 500 Hamas terrorists. It's like from a scene in a movie. Actually, by doing that, they saved lots of life.
Even as we spoke, the news came that Hamas promised to release a few more bodies tonight and several more tomorrow. If Tamir is among them, his family can finally heal. But Nir says he won't rest until every hostage is home. And either way, he'll never forgive his government for doing what he considers so little and so late.
I don't believe that bringing back all hostages was first priority for this government. They chose their political considerations over saving lives.
Do you and your family feel left behind?
Of course. We feel like it's the second time we are being betrayed by our own government. First time was on October 7, 2023, and the second time is right now. The Israeli society are celebrating in the streets right now, like it's all over. They gave their bodies and souls to defend Israel, but today Israel is forgetting them.
The defining characteristic of this hostage crisis has been the unity it inspired. Every Israeli identifying as the family of all the captives. Now, as the country and the world look to the future, for the first time, some have been left out in the cold. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Layla Milana Allen in Kiryat Gat, Israel.
With Hamas yet to return all the hostage remains as part of this first phase of the ceasefire deal, we turn now to Yousef Munayyer. He's the head of the Palestine-Israel program and senior fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. That's a nonprofit research group. Yousef, welcome to the show. You heard Layla report there. Hamas say they don't know where all the bodies are. What should we understand about why they don't know and if they'll be able to make good on the pledge to return all the remains?
Right. Thank you for having me. I mean, the first thing I would say is this was actually largely expected in the agreement that was hammered out in Cairo prior to the peace summit the other day, where Donald Trump met with all these global leaders to declare an end to the war. There was a detailed agreement about this part of the process that the Israelis came to, along with the Palestinians and the mediators. And part of that agreement actually delineated what would happen with regards to the remains of Israeli captives that were still inside Gaza. And the Palestinians made it very clear at that point that they're not in possession of all of these remains and that it will take some time. So a mechanism was established to share information between the different parties, the Palestinians on the ground, the mediators, and the Red Cross about what they know of these remains, where they are, how they're trying to reach them, and that was agreed upon at that point. So what's concerning now is that the Israelis seem to be acting as if this was a surprise, when in fact we knew that this was going to be an immense challenge. Remember, some 83% of structures in the Gaza Strip have been partially or completely destroyed, and there's very little heavy equipment with which to do the searching. So this is a big reason why we're at this place today.
So, Yusuf, a lot of questions, it sounds like, on what's been publicly said and what's privately agreed to, but a lot of questions around whether or not the remaining bodies will be returned. I do want to ask you about what we've seen just in the last couple of days on the ground in Gaza, which is Hamas forces in uniform standing guard in some areas, also engaging in gun battles with people who don't support them, and also horrifying video of them rounding up and executing publicly people who they accuse of collaborating with Israel. Is all of that sanctioned activity by the same Hamas leadership that signed on to this ceasefire deal?
Well, I certainly cannot speak for them. They would have to speak on that, and I'm not sure that I've seen any statement in relation to that. What I can tell you is that extrajudicial assassinations or killings are clearly violations of international law in pretty much every circumstance. At the same time, the situation in Gaza is extremely fragile and dangerous. There is no real authority in Gaza right now, except for the pieces of what's left of the previous Hamas authority on the ground in the Gaza Strip. And there are a large number of vigilantes, gangs, groups that have been involved in other extreme activity, groups that have been collaborating with the Israelis and implicated in other human rights violations. And we also have to keep in mind, over the last 2 years, police stations in the Gaza Strip have been targeted and destroyed. Courthouses have been targeted and destroyed. Members of the civilian police force in Gaza, some 1,500 of them, have been killed by the Israeli military. So it's not surprising at this point that law enforcement is not exactly present in the Gaza Strip or behaving in the ways we would normally expect in a situation where there is control and no war. So obviously these scenes are very disturbing, and it's incumbent, I think, on all parties to act within the bounds of international law. But it's going to be a very difficult situation in Gaza until there is a authority or government established that can take the reins of the situation on the ground.
A very tenuous peace deal in place. And as you note, a lot of questions ahead, let alone disarmament, governance down the line. Yusuf Munayyer from the Palestine-Israel program at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
In the day's other headlines, President Trump says U.S. forces struck another boat in the waters off Venezuela that he claims was a drug vessel. Mr. Trump posted video of the strike on social media, saying all 6 people aboard were killed and that no U.S. forces were harmed. It marks the 5th deadly strike in the Caribbean against alleged drug traffickers, which the Trump administration is treating as unlawful combatants who can be met with military force. Democrats and those opposed to the administration's actions say the strikes violate U.S. and international law. Also today, President Trump hosted Argentina's President Javier Milei at the White House, where he threatened to end U.S. assistance to that country if its internal politics don't go the way Mr. Trump wants.
If he loses, we are not going to be generous with Argentina.
The president said he would not, in his words, waste our time with further investments if Argentina turns away from Milei's policies in that country's upcoming midterm elections. President Trump sees an ideological ally in the right-wing leader who is up for re-election in 2027. The visit comes after the U.S. provided $20 billion in aid to Argentina. The administration denies that it was a bailout. Later in the afternoon, President Trump awarded Charlie Kirk with a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. Kirk's wife, Erica, accepted the medal for her late husband at a ceremony in the Rose Garden on what would have been the conservative activist's 32nd birthday. The man who set fire to the Pennsylvania governor's mansion in April pleaded guilty today to attempted murder and other charges. As part of a plea deal, Cody Balmer was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. Governor Josh Shapiro and his family were sleeping inside when the 38-year-old scaled a fence and used beer bottles filled with gasoline to start the fire. No one was injured, but Balmer told police he planned to beat Shapiro with a small sledgehammer if he had found him. Shapiro told reporters today the guilty plea amounted to real accountability, and he warned of the dangers of such attacks.
I think it's important that in this time of rising political violence that none of us grow numb to it or accept this as the normal course of doing business for elected officials.
Balmer turned himself in the day after the attack. His family has said he suffers from mental health issues. A massive Pacific storm is battering the West Coast from California to the Rockies with heavy rain, flash floods, and damaging winds. The sudden storm, known as a microburst, tore through Tempe, Arizona late Monday. High winds ripped the roof off a business and collapsed part of an apartment complex. Some parts of Southern California saw more than 3 inches of rain this morning as authorities evacuated more than 100 homes. The National Weather Service issued flash flood warnings for areas that suffered recent wildfires, making them more susceptible to mudslides. LA officials say they are staying prepared.
The evacuation warning will be in effect for the burn scar. There'll be strike teams, rescue teams, helicopters are all here at Station 59. And this is out of an abundance of caution. We are hoping that the system will not be as bad as this, but of course we want to be extremely prepared.
Meantime, a massive Atlantic storm known as a nor'easter is moving away from the U.S., but not before it created dangerous, choppy seas from the mid-Atlantic to New England, leading to this water rescue off the coast of Cape Cod. In Madagascar, an elite military unit claimed power today after that nation's president was removed in an apparent coup. Outside City Hall in the nation's capital, protesters celebrated the transfer of power after weeks of anti-government demonstrations. The announcement of military control came shortly after Parliament voted overwhelmingly to impeach the country's president. The military says it will appoint a prime minister to quickly form a new civilian government. On Wall Street today, stocks ended mixed amid ongoing worries over trade tensions between the U.S. and China. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added around 200 points on the day. The Nasdaq lost ground, falling about 170 points. The S&P 500 also ended lower. And R&B singer D'Angelo has died.
Brown sugar, babe. I guess high up your love, I don't know how to behave.
Starting with his debut album, Brown Sugar, the man-born Michael Eugene Archer blended hip-hop with jazz, funk, and gospel into what became known as neo-soul. His follow-up, Voodoo, earned him the Grammy for Best R&B Album back in 2001. D'Angelo then stepped back from the spotlight for more than a decade, until 2014 and the release of his third and final album, Black Messiah, which also won the Grammy. D'Angelo's family called him a shining star, saying he died after a battle with pancreatic cancer. D'Angelo was 51 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, how public health could be affected by the latest round of federal government layoffs. And we sit down with former Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy to discuss his new memoir and the state of the Supreme Court.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Today marks the deadline for journalists to decide whether to comply with the Defense Department's new rules, a requirement for keeping the credentials that allow them to access the Pentagon. The Pentagon's chief spokesperson has described the new policy as common sense, but virtually every news organization, to include PBS News, has refused to sign it, arguing that it infringes on First Amendment protections.
Where there was a historic outcome. I want to start with that real quick.
For decades, reporters have held building passes that let them freely enter the Pentagon to attend press briefings, meet with officials, and talk with sources as they report on the Defense Department. But now, in order to keep those credentials, the Trump administration is requiring journalists to comply with a policy that says reporters cannot solicit or obtain any information the Defense Department does not explicitly authorize. Doing so, the Pentagon says, would be a criminal act and would not be considered protected activity under the First Amendment. It follows Sean Parnell, the Defense Department's chief spokesperson, posting on social media, "Despite many statements to the contrary, journalists are not required to clear stories with us. They retain robust access to our public affairs offices, the briefing room, and the ability to ask questions, which we continue to answer thoroughly. The only change is an overdue update to our credentialing process, which hasn't been revised in years, if not decades, to align with modern security standards. Access to the Pentagon is a privilege, not a right." Today at the White House, the Defense Secretary defended the new policy.
It used to be, Mr. President, the press could go anywhere, pretty much anywhere in the Pentagon, the most classified area in the world. Or also that if they sign on to the credentialing, they're not going to try to get soldiers to break the law by giving them classified information. So it's common sense stuff.
For more on this, we turn now to Nancy Youssef, a staff writer at The Atlantic who covers national security issues, and David Schultz is director of the Media Freedom and Information Access Clinic at Yale University, and he advised the Pentagon Press Association on how to handle the Defense Department's new rules. Thank you both for being here. David, we'll start with you. You heard the Defense Secretary say this is a common sense update. They're just modernizing the rules. You argue that this policy criminalizes routine reporting. So what exactly in the language makes it so objectionable?
Yeah, I would say there's two things that are really quite objectionable. One is, it was mentioned just now, that it says that it's improper to solicit information if it has not been approved for release. But you know what the Pentagon calls illegal solicitation, we would call news gathering. And more important than the label, soliciting information is an activity protected by the First Amendment. And beyond that, the Pentagon is requiring reporters for the first time to affirm in writing that they understand that national security is harmed by disclosing information the Pentagon has not approved for release, even if that information is unclassified. We know that is not true. Even information that's classified can often be disclosed without harm, and the public interest sometimes compels its disclosure. Affirming up front that harm can occur from reporting information if it's not officially approved is anathema to a free democracy. And it's information that could be used against a reporter in future litigation. Indeed, the place where reporters are being asked to sign has a large privacy notice across the top of it, making clear that the document can be used by the Pentagon in court. So I would say the obvious intent here is to intimidate and chill reporting on anything that's not officially disclosed.
And Nancy, why is it so important for reporters to have in-person access to the Pentagon, to actually walk the halls and talk to people?
Well, remember, this is an organization that uses nearly $1 trillion of taxpayer money, employs 3 million people. And so being able to get as much information to the public as possible about what is happening in that building, the decisions that are being made about consequential national security decisions, is critical to our reporting. It allows us to bring the kind of nuance and detail to make for the most accurate reporting on issues as important as when the nation goes to war.
And we should say that reporters don't have access to classified areas at the Pentagon. What safeguards already exist to prevent journalists from accidentally accessing or publishing classified or sensitive material?
So first of all, we wear badges every day, and not only do we wear badges, they identify us as press. We swipe in and out of the building so they can see when we're there, and you have to go through a background check to get that pass. Secondly, the Pentagon is a big office building with lots and lots of offices that are secured. And so there's not classified information sort of haphazardly thrown around. It's put in secure rooms and rooms that we don't have access to. And I would note that the Pentagon has not identified some security breach involving reporters that shows that there has been a violation of these rules. And so I think what you have seen as a press that has been allowed to talk to officials, understand decisions that are being made, and handle information as we are trusted to do by the public in a responsible way.
So based on your reporting, what is driving this policy? Why is the Pentagon doing this now when no other federal agency has anything like this in place?
Well, since Secretary Hegseth arrived at the building, he has been aggressively going after access for journalists. Within weeks, required some news agencies to vacate their desks, vacate their news booths. He has indicated that when he doesn't like coverage, that there should be repercussions for it. We've seen a secretary who has only had 2 press briefings. In the 10 months he's been in office, we've had less information than we've ever had before. Even before these rules were put in place, we have seen restrictions on our ability to obtain information. You mentioned earlier in the show the strikes on boats in Venezuela. Till this day, we don't know what kind of ordinance was used, who's conducting those strikes, whether they're from drones or from ships, or even who's on those boats. And so from the beginning, we have seen a secretary that has been quite aggressive in pursuing journalists who write information that goes against what he and his department want released.
And David, building on one of Nancy's points, you point to what you see as hypocrisy, that the recent security breaches within the Pentagon have come from within the Defense Department, not from journalists. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Nancy just said, that there is absolutely no need for this new policy and no justification for requiring reporters to sign these statements. As you said, no other agency does it. They don't do it at the White House. They don't do it at the State Department. And we should be clear, there was no problem that prompted this change. And I do think it's a bit more than hypocritical to suggest that this is a common sense step that needs to be taken to protect national security, given that the major leaks of classified information during this administration have come from the top, starting with the casual use of Signal by the Secretary himself. It's not reporters that are breaching the protocols here.
So looking ahead, how will this change the way you and your colleagues report on the Pentagon?
Well, I should start by saying we will continue to report on the Pentagon and do so aggressively, as we've always done. I think what will be lost is the opportunity for the American public to see troops. We won't be able to do things like go on ships with sailors. We won't be able to go in Humvees with troops. We won't have that kind of detail that I think has really added nuance to the reporting and to the public's understanding of national security and where we ask America's sons and daughters to deploy and potentially be in harm's way.
Nancy Youssef, David Schultz, thank you both for your perspectives and insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The markets may have finished this day on a mixed note, but if you've been watching in recent months, you'll have noticed the markets have continued to be strong despite continuing concerns around the shutdown, tariffs, and inflation. In fact, the broadest index, the S&P 500, and the tech-heavy NASDAQ have set records more than 30 times this year. And there's other data that suggests the economy is still chugging along at a steady clip. But that is only part of what's happening. As our economics correspondent Paul Solman reports, for the vast majority of Americans, this economy is landing very differently right now.
This is Meta Ray-Ban display.
You don't have to look far to get a clear view of those at the tippy top of the economy.
The first AI glasses with a high-resolution display.
Mark Zuckerberg's Meta paying $250 million to recruit an artificial intelligence researcher. A proposed $1 trillion compensation package for Tesla CEO Elon Musk. Former Google head Eric Schmidt's purchase of a 123-room, $110 million LA mansion to host events. But well below the hyper-rich, millions of other Americans are also prospering. As evidence, 56% of luxury consumers, according to Saks Global, plan to spend the same or more this season compared to last, up substantially from just last spring.
Luxury travel continues to hold very strong.
Misty Bellis of luxury travel network Virtuoso sees the same.
When we look at our fall bookings for this year, we are up 38% year over year.
If I wanted to go buy a Rolls Royce, I could do it right now and pay cash.
Paul McGarvey and his wife aren't big travelers, but comfortably retired, they are insulated.
I do a net worth survey on the Fidelity website every week, and it just does nothing but go up. All right, my net worth keeps going up.
John, a retired engineer, is also pretty comfortable.
I own my own house. I own a couple of cars. I have everything that I really want.
Problem is, even when you include these upper middle income Americans among the prosperous, that still leaves a full 80% who are feeling squeezed, like geologist Timothy Runkle.
It doesn't really matter what I'm doing in my career or what other jobs that I'm pursuing. It just doesn't keep up with what the necessities of life are right now.
Donna is in sales.
I haven't taken a vacation in over almost 2.5 years.
Joseph Williamson, a city planner in Collinsville, Illinois, proud home of the world's largest ketchup bottle.
Honestly, right now, as we speak, $200 to my name, maybe.
Fiore Berhana, assistant professor.
I have student loans and medical debt.
Emily Zorena is a librarian.
I'm finding myself needing to use like the buy now, pay later things for bigger purchases, such as like car repairs.
One way to depict the increasing split between the top 20% and the rest of Americans, says economist Mark Zandi, the letter K.
The folks at the top part of the income and wealth distribution are doing fabulously well. And of course, folks at the bottom part of the K, lower middle income households, they're struggling.
Heather Long wrote about the K-shaped economy in the Washington Post.
This economy right now is being driven by spending from the top 20% of Americans. So that dividing line is roughly $175,000. Families that earn above that mark, they're living la vida loca. You know, they're out there, they're spending on birthday parties and lavish weddings and big trips abroad and growing their spending month after month. And the rest of America, the bottom 80%, they're cautious right now.
Their incomes haven't kept pace with inflation. They're encumbered with debt. They don't have any assets.
Assets to benefit from.
The stock market is booming. We have record valuations. All of that accrues to the folks with big stock portfolios, and that's in the top 10, 20% of the distribution. They own their own home. They own bonds. They own crypto. They own lots of stuff.
Of course, American wealth inequality is hardly new. Point is, it's getting worse.
You can go back to kind of the early 90s and the top 10%, the wealthiest Americans, you know, they would account for 35% of overall spending. So a pretty good chunk was relying on the top. But today that number is basically 50%. Half of spending is now dependent on just the top 10%.
That's households making about $250,000 or more. The economy's more reliant on them than ever. Official consumer spending is rising thanks to folks like Bellis's high-end travel customers.
Suites are still selling very well at hotels. Junior suites, anything that's in the upper category there, business class, premium economy, all of those upper categories continue to hold strong.
Washington, D.C. realtor Michael Rankin specializes in the luxury market.
It is very strong and very robust. They've been buying and spending a lot of money.
In fact, his challenge is there aren't enough houses for his high-end clients to buy.
What we have now is a scarcity of supply of the super high end, and our marketplace is 7 million, 10 million, 15 million, even higher. I have active buyers and clients who are looking for something very special, very well renovated, very well presented, and there's just a scarcity of supply.
But while the well-off are fueling the economy, so many others are pinching pennies, looking to spend less on just the basics at discount stores like Dollar General, which recently reported an increase in middle and higher income shoppers. And budget grocer Aldi is America's fastest growing retailer.
I'm spending sometimes upwards of $150, $200 a week on groceries.
Joe Williamson's pay is barely keeping up with prices at the store, like so many Americans.
I used to be a person who would pay off my credit card every single month. I wouldn't keep a balance at all, but I have had to start keeping a balance, and I'm not able to pay it off every month.
Pretty good. This summer, Jessica Cuevas and her husband moved their family to Mexico because they could no longer afford to live in Chicago on her husband's $67,000 a year salary.
Rent is about $1,000 US. In Chicago, where we're from, it could be anywhere between $25,000 to $5,000.
And Cuevas can work too, since she can now afford daycare.
That alone is about $150 a month compared to $1,400.
Now, the K bifurcation isn't just among households.
There's also a K-shaped situation going on the business side. And you can look at the stock market, and it's being hugely driven by a handful of superstar tech companies that are involved in the AI boom. And they're just in a totally different league right now than everybody else.
And they, it turns out, are driving the economy.
In the first half of 2025, spending on AI was as big of a contributor to growth in this country as consumption. There's a lot of risk to an economy that is so heavily reliant on this AI boom and the rich, and there could be some pullback. If your chair has fewer and fewer legs to stand on, it's a lot easier to knock that over.
Meanwhile, the AI boom means more data centers devouring more energy, driving up electricity prices for the already strapped 80%.
Everybody around me has either doubled or tripled in their power expenses, and we can't afford it.
Not to mention rising rents as investors buy up residential real estate.
My rent is going to continue rising, and my pay isn't.
So why not buy instead?
I do not feel like I could ever buy a house. That's not even on my radar, quite honestly.
Just 25% of Americans these days feel they have a good chance of improving their standard of living, a record low.
Why do you suppose there hasn't been a revolt from the bottom? The pitchforks, in one cliched version of the revolt.
There's clearly a lot of skewing of the income and wealth distribution, but times historically when you've seen, as you say, the pitchforks coming out, the skewing is much more pronounced. We're not living in Paris, France, circa late 1700s, for example.
That is even the bottom arm of the K.
Making 50, 75K a year here in the U.S., your standard of living, just given the improvements in technologies and everything else, is probably as good as the Hearsts were back 100 years ago when they were in their castle.
A castle without air conditioning, TV, the internet, access to modern medicine, and so much we now take for granted. On the other hand, that man's home was a castle. For the PBS NewsHour, Paul Salman.
The government shutdown will pass the 2-week mark tonight after a continuing resolution failed in the Senate once again. Neither side seems close to resuming talks. For its part, the president's team posted on social media that it's, quote, making every preparation to batten down the hatches and ride out the shutdown. The White House also threatened to continue laying off federal workers. Just this past weekend, roughly 1,300 employees at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention received notices that they were fired. Then, as the administration realized it had fired some key staff, reportedly half of them were reinstated the next day. The whiplash still leaves the agency without many crucial professionals. To break down the impact, I spoke earlier today with Dr. Nirav Shah. He's former principal deputy director of the CDC, now a visiting professor at Colby College. Dr. Shah, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Amna.
So from the folks you talked to and from what you've seen, for so many people at the CDC to have been fired and then rehired, even with these lingering threats of more continued layoffs to come, what kind of impact is that having on folks at the CDC?
It has an impact in two ways. The first is this sort of whiplash with being fired one day, rehired the next. It suggests that there's managerial incompetence at play. But the second thing that it does, particularly for the staff, is it's a morale killer. Morale at the CDC was already exceedingly low. Indeed, not more than 2 months ago, the CDC was literally attacked by a gunman who fired over 500 rounds at the building. That alone would be sufficient to kill the morale of any organization. But now this whiplash of firings and rehirings means that morale at the agency is exceptionally low. That has implications for all of us and our safety.
When you look at where folks have been fired and not rehired, is our understanding, among those staffers are people at an agency known as ASPR, I believe, that works with the intelligence agencies to prepare for or protect against things like pandemics and weaponized pathogens. What do we know about the impact of a team like that being fired?
ASPR, which focuses on strategic preparedness for bioterrorism and biodefense threats, is really the connective tissue that links up a number of different agencies, not just within Health and Human Services, but across the federal government, to make sure that we are ready to detect a potential biological threat and then respond to it in unison. It's not a large entity, but it's an important one. It's the nucleus of a lot of our work. And so any reductions in force to such a small but important group, again, leave us all less safe.
There are a number of other agencies where we saw some firings, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration among them. Are there other teams that stand out in particular to you as very dangerous or potentially harmful? And also, how should the rest of the country look at this? Is this something that's going to show up in their lives tomorrow or this week?
The impact of them may not be seen for days, weeks, months, even years. But when that impact is materialized, it will be in the midst of a crisis or a catastrophe, when we are the last ones to know about a devastating biological threat, when all of our foreign adversaries have had weeks or months of lead time to be ready, and we are the ones who are scrambling. The worst part about all of these cuts is that the impact of them won't be felt until there's an emergency. And then we'll all be looking around wondering why we were the last to know. It will mean that the way that the health of the American public is protected for the foreseeable future is through state and local governments, not necessarily through the federal government.
Can I put to you what we've heard from the president about some of these firings? Because he's repeatedly characterized these as firings around Democratic programs or Democratic priorities. What's your response to that? How do you look at that language?
That is the wrong way to characterize public health programs that keep us all safe. There's no virus out there, there's no deadly pathogen out there that only goes after folks of one political party or another. When the next biological threat comes, it will attack everybody irrespective of their political preferences. And therefore, the systems that keep us safe are not Democratic or Republican or red or purple or anything in between.
Dr. Shah, longer term, when you look at the future of the CDC, for people who are being fired now or even rehired, are they likely to stay at the agency? Or the things that are being broken down now, are they able to be built back up later?
They will be able to be built back up, but unfortunately, I fear that it will take a generation to do so. The talent and the career scientists who have been let go, again, these are not political appointees, these are career public servant scientists. They have other opportunities owing to their excellence and their education. And those opportunities will be found elsewhere, perhaps in industry, perhaps in academia. And this is not just at the CDC, it's at the NIH and at the FDA and SAMHSA. Those scientists will take a generation, if not more, to be lured back or for the next generation of scientists to come up. What it means specifically in an era of increasing bioterror threats is that other countries and foreign adversaries will have a leg up on us whenever that next threat emerges. We'll be the ones behind when we should be the ones in front.
That is Dr. Nirav Shah, formerly of the CDC, now with Colby College in Maine, joining us tonight. Dr. Shah, thank you. Good to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.
Former Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy served on the nation's highest court for 3 decades and was often described as the swing vote in landmark decisions, from marriage equality to campaign finance. It's a label he's long resisted, even years after his 2018 retirement. When we spoke last week about his new memoir, Life, Law, and Liberty, he explained why.
Well, it's really the metaphor that's the problem for me. The metaphor, you see this person swinging back and forth. And my comment when people say about that is that the cases swing, I don't. And so that's why it seems to me, people can disagree, that my jurisprudence is quite consistent and it doesn't swing. And so that was one of the things explained in the book.
Mm-hmm. You were the pivotal voice in cases that expanded LGBTQ rights, that preserved abortion rights at the time, but also a ruling that struck down campaign finance restrictions. How do you reconcile or explain those strands of your legal philosophy?
The campaign finance cases are very, very difficult. I'm sure most people don't like the idea that millionaires, maybe billionaires, come in and spend all this money in a place where they don't even live in order to get somebody elected. And why should the successful candidate be the one that has the most money? Something is wrong with that. So then you're asking me, well, what are you talking about, Kennedy? Why did you write this? The answer was that what the Congress had done was to say that corporations could not give the money. They forgot that the New York Times was a corporation, and it was exempt. The Washington Post was a corporation, it was exempt. And many corporations were small chamber of commerce, a grocery store. So to me, if we had upheld it for just big corporations, we would have had endless cases on drawing the line, and we had no jurisprudential reason to do it. My suggestion, and it's still my hope, is that the voters will be better informed about who is giving money, who is getting money, and take that into account when they vote. And the voters should be better informed. The book talks generally about we have to be better informed about how our government works and what the issues of our time are.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about how the book is organized, because you do explain your opinions in these key cases. In the Obergefell v. Hodges case, you wrote so powerfully about the dignity of same-sex couples. And you write in the book about how someone once told you that the opinion passed the refrigerator test. Explain that for us.
Somebody said you passed, we were at some event, somebody said, your opinion passed the refrigerator test. I said, what's the refrigerator test? If there's something that's written in a newspaper article or a book, or in this case, a Supreme Court opinion, and the parents want the family to read it, they get some adhesive tape and put it on the refrigerator. And then everybody reads it when they're going to get something out of the refrigerator. So certain parts of my opinion, they said, pass the refrigerator test. Those parts of the opinions which talk about the dignity and the sanctity of marriage.
Justice Clarence Thomas recently said at Catholic University that legal precedents, this is a quote, are not the gospel. Given the current petitions seeking to revisit Obergefell, do you worry that parts of your legacy, including that case, could be undone?
Well, of course, the law must stand the test of time. And if we learn or think we learn new things over the course of years, judges and the legal profession and the general public are free to examine, think about the reasons. That's why we give reasons for what we do. That's why we write about what we do. And we see if those reasons can stand the test of time. So the fact that there is a re-examination and additional conversation, to me, is a strength of our system.
Yeah. I want to ask you about democracy and the court's role in preserving it. You warned this past summer in remarks that freedom and democracy are at risk. What, in your view, poses the greatest threat to our democratic system?
Lack of civility. Aristotle wrote that democracy depends upon a rational, thoughtful, probing discussion in which you have disagreements, but you respect the other person. And you do not, and you respect the dignity of the other person. Those with whom you disagree have a dignity that you must respect. And in this age of the cyber age, we have some problems. initially my thought was, oh, the cyber age is good because more people will talk to each other. And I don't know, there are 39,000 books in the Library of Congress. There are close to 2 billion websites on the internet. And the problem with the internet, as a professor from the University of Michigan, Barbara Meekum, wrote, is that, sure, we talk to each other more, but we talk only to people who feel exactly the same way as we do. We don't have, the internet doesn't lend itself to a debate. If you and I are going out to lunch, we'll find something we disagree with, and we'll enjoy the lunch, but we disagree. That doesn't happen on the internet.
Beyond that, is the court doing enough to safeguard our democratic system? There are those who argue that the court, with its current trajectory, is strengthening the executive branch at the expense of Congress, at the expense of the people. Is that, in your view, a fair assessment? Well, my practice is not to comment on current issues. We have, during my time on the court, we had 3 times as many cases as they have now. Does that mean that we were 3 times as busy? No, because of all of these emergency orders. And the problem with emergency orders is that there is little time to have briefs, argument, to think about it. And the court, in my view, is beginning to recognize that and beginning to say, there'll be an executive order. Sure, we'll allow it for a couple months, or we won't allow it for a couple months, but we'll hear arguments and then we'll decide. It's very, very important that the court hear arguments. One of the problems that we have is, as you know, lawyers are brilliant now about finding a way for almost any social issue to become part of a lawsuit, so that courts can decide almost any social issue. This means that we have to be very, very careful about the authority and the position of the courts in deciding so many critical issues that the public should be deciding for themselves. Nino Scalia would say, oh, well, you ask what the framers of the Constitution would do, and if they don't give you the answer, then you can't come up with it. And many of us disagree with that, but it is quite true that we have to be very careful that we don't just jump off from what the framers said and decide whatever we like. On that point, as of last week, the court had issued 23 rulings in a row for the Trump administration. At a time when public opinion of the Supreme Court is near historic lows, do you worry that the consistent support for the Trump administration feeds into this public perception that the court is partisan, or worse than that, political? The danger of the court being thought of as partisan and political is very real and of great concern to me. It begins with the confirmation process. The confirmation process is too partisan. There are very few presidents who appointed justices from a different party. Eisenhower did, Brennan, and you could argue about Warren. Warren was something of an independent. And so partisanship has always played a role. But it shouldn't dominate. We should talk about temperament and learning and moderation and thoughtful writing. We should emphasize that more than just he or she will decide this my way and therefore we're going to appoint that person as a judge. That's not right. You have shaped the law in ways that have touched millions of lives, expanding rights, defining liberty, at times dividing the nation with some of the rulings. When you reflect on that, what part of your legacy feels most meaningful to you? Well, I'll think of this answer later tonight. The part that is that we give reasons for what we do, and that it's essential for all of government, for all thoughtful people, to give reasons for what we do, and to be unafraid to discuss those reasons openly and with an open and with a searching mindset. The book is Life, Law, and Liberty, a Memoir. Justice Anthony Kennedy. Thanks again for being here. A real pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure and honor to be on this great television network.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Navaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. For more than 50 years, advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org.
At BDO, I feel like a true individual. People value me for me. They care about what I want, my needs, my career path. I matter here.
Two retiring executives turn their focus to greyhounds, giving these former race dogs a real chance to win. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your purpose, and the way you give back. Life well planned.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.